Welcome back to the IDE seminar. It's great to have one of our own here, Shayne Longpre, who is a PhD student in Media Lab, working with Sandy Pentland, working on all manner of things related to data governance, data provenance, how do we deal with the regulation of data in an age when data is becoming more and more important. And he's going to talk to us about the Data Provenance Initiative and probably a few other things. So, Shayne, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. I'm a fourth-year PhD student, as Stan mentioned. I'd like to start with a quick referendum, because normally I give this talk in less than 30 minutes. So if people want, we can also cover in the last 10-15 another topic, which is very recent and relevant right now, which talks a little bit about third-party AI red teaming and evaluation. Or we can focus just on what I was invited to do. I don't know what people's distribution of interests are. So interest in the extra part of the talk, or? Okay, awesome. I have great slides for it because it's recent, so you won't be disappointed. All right, I'll dive in. So when it loads, I'm going to talk a little bit about work, or a series of works done as part of the Data Provenance Initiative. What is the initiative? Here, I'll stand up so you can see me. It is a voluntary collective of now about 50 researchers from almost 20 countries who are really passionate about auditing. I know we're very excited people, but we realize that there's a lack of transparency in general around where the data is coming from, and a lack of tools to be able to train AI models the way that you want to train them with the correct conditions or risk profile or whatever it might be. And so it started with just a few MIT students, and now it's like literally 50 plus people, and we're releasing a new paper pretty soon. But I'm going to talk not just about that, but I'm going to set the scene a little bit with the state of transparency in foundation model development in general. This paper on the left, which is kind of the main benchmark right now for measuring the extent to which major AI developers are transparent about the uses, production, and deployment of their models before we go into specifically the data element of that. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'll kind of stop at regular parts to take those. So in 2023, October, I guess 1 year ago, we released 100 indicators as a collaboration with folks from Stanford and Princeton, mainly Percy Lang's team, and I was a researcher from IT collaborating on this, where we divided elements of transparency around foundation models like ChatGPT or foundation systems into three components. The upstream, so what data, what labor, and what compute was used to build them. There are a ton of different concerns around, data workers and where they're coming from, what are they paid, were they exposed to risks in the process of doing annotation, the data itself, are there copyright concerns or privacy concerns, or will they have cascading effects on various, creative economies? All these questions, to start to be able to answer them, you have to know generally what these models are training on. And then there's compute. There's a lot of environmental and cost, questions around that. For the model itself, there's the methods used to train the model, documentation around its uses, its capabilities, its risks, its limitations. And then downstream, we have 35 indicators around the distribution and use of the model, its policies around its use, and the real-world impact that it's measured to have to the extent that that is monitored. So before I dive into the measurements, any questions on what this is?
I have a question.
Yeah.
We've had machine learning for a long time. We've been training models for a long time. What's different now?
Fantastic question. I feel like there's many ways not to answer that question, because I think I agree with you. I think that you're implying that the difference maybe isn't as big as some people or all the hype pretends it to be.
I'm sort of implying that I agree with you, and that we probably should have been doing this a long time ago. And so, what is the impetus for now, like public maybe, or in the general, not public, but in the general sort of state of the profession?
I mean, I'll give my answer. I think it's because a lot of these systems, there is an emergence of better capabilities, or at least people believe that the capabilities are that much higher, and therefore they're more willing to deploy it in more uncertain and interactive settings with people. So over-reliance maybe on the performance of these systems, and they're very general purpose. The generative aspect of them means that they're used in so many different places. Yes, I will definitely share the deck after. I have a story. I was working at Google a couple of years ago, and we trained a model about the same quality of GPT-2. Released it. It was called Flan T5, and a couple months later, we learned that it was being deployed as part of a battlefield planning language model system that was advertised by Palantir. And we looked at it, and I was so shocked because, like, this model, you know, I'm afraid for the people deploying it more so than, you know, who it's going against. You know, move the tanks where, like, it has absolutely no idea. It's hopeless. And so when I see people using it in this sort of way, you know, maybe there is potential to use these systems in these settings, but like this wasn't the model for that. It wasn't the right time. And so I suspect there'll be many uses of these systems in places that we would want transparency and oversight so we can catch issues earlier rather than later. I'd say that's the overarching motivation. We do draw a distinction that we're talking about foundation models as defined by the Stanford work. We're not talking about all the different types of AI that's integrated in many parts of the economy. And that's a very intentional decision.
Did you have 200 indicators and decide that 100 was enough?
We could have gone to 400, and often many of them became merged. You know, there were multi-part. You know, should this be, you know, a third of a point here, 2/3 there? But we thought simpler is sometimes better, and let's take the core things and condense them. And there was a lot of pushback. People were like, "Why are you really emphasizing this part and not that part? Like this part clearly is so much more important. Like, is the model open, or is there access to red team? Like that's more important than like, did you release an report on a non-reproducible evaluation about trustworthiness, you know, to some extent, but others might disagree. So we took the measurements, we did it ourselves in-house. We gave the companies an opportunity to respond and propose critiques, but it was a lot of upfront work. And these were the final results. And it offended everybody because the closed models are like, why are you giving us such low scores? We're doing all this safety work and reporting all these things and doing all this due diligence, but you're giving us, you know, Anthropic 36%. And the open models were like, really? Our model is open. You can go and access it and test the hell out of it. Why are we, you know, just a few percent above GPT-4? And a lot of these points are good. It's sort of a very early index. Things like RDR and others in the social media and platform and telecommunications space are more mature. But it stoked a lot of conversation, disagreement about what really matters. If we want to know something about foundation models, what should it be? And in my mind, this graph answers that. So we look along the x-axis at the companies themselves, or the developers, I should say, and the models, and then the major sort of dimensions of transparency. And so I'm going to direct your attention to this part over here, which is on average how low or high certain parts are. And you'll see that this part in particular, around the upstream inputs, the data, the labor, and compute are extremely low. You have transparency from Meta, you know, and Big Science, but like almost nothing from a lot of the major labs that don't want to reveal this for fear probably of, you know, a lot of the bad press does come out of these types of disclosures. They're much more transparent about basic things on the methodology they use. They actually publish some papers, yeah.
I just want to clarify, so like, it seems that some of these factors are more about, you know, the risks associated with using a model, or like the, you know, like usage policy here. Like, isn't it more important for you to capture maybe like the training process that they use to arrive at this model? And that sort of should get weighted more in terms of transparency, because then the usage policy and the mitigation risk, that's sort of, there is a part of the onus on the user itself to figure that out as well, right? Like it's not just the model creator who needs to figure out all the risks possible under the sun. So like, is there some kind of reweighting here that you've thought about where the training part is, if it's very opaque, then the score is very low. But if it's relatively transparent on how they got trained and what types of annotators they use and the data they use and the GPUs they use, then it's quite good for anyone to look at that.
This is a fantastic question, and like exactly the kind of debate that this sparks. But some people might say, the developers would say, because they don't want to be as transparent about data or labor, because that often opens them up to lawsuits, copyright infringement cases, and fair use that's boiling over right now. So they're like, well, instead we're going to evaluate the models internally, release the reports, and show that we've done the due diligence. So they'd say, that's directly testing the model. Why do you want to know what it was trained on when we've shown you with the tests? I agree with you that like different people have different perspectives about what matters more. I'm not going to tell you the final word. Well, I will actually in the second presentation. I'll give some opinions of mine, but yeah.
Isn't the data for some of this though, like, good that it's not getting released for privacy reasons? Like, isn't there that aspect?
So there's two aspects when it comes to copyright and privacy. One is the input to the model and one is the output. So if you trained on something, it's possible that you can regurgitate. The model will regurgitate that information. So people want to know what you trained on because they want to know if you did sufficiently privacy preserving, incorporated those methods. They want to know if there is a risk at all that this data was seen and therefore could be exposed. Same thing with copyright. And so the data itself, you don't need to tell us exactly what it was necessarily, but like, okay, which websites, things like that, which sources, without revealing it in its entirety. But for the most part, a lot of it is public. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe I missed it. What is impact?
Impact is like measurements or monitoring on where exactly the model has been used and what sort of. I focused on the top indicators, so I could pull it up and find some for you, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
I guess I think it's pretty compelling that like we want to know some of these downstream or the upstream and the like model specifications.
Mhm.
But I feel like with most technologies, and this is, I think you were trying to get this Hungy a little bit, like we build it ethically and then, or quote unquote, like a lot of things in society, like you build it and you have to be transparent about how you build it. Like, I have to build the bridge and then, you do whatever you want with the bridge. Like, why are you deciding that we should incorporate those like downstream evaluations? Because those are very much outside of the company's control. And if they try and control the downstream usage, in some ways that's like kind of paternalistic and like potentially not a great thing. So I wonder like why you guys decided to incorporate the downstream at all, to be honest.
So, great question again. If you are releasing Llama 2, you don't have control over who downloads it, or at least someone has to click through and say they won't do certain things, agree to some license or terms. But if you're ChatGPT, you have a lot of room, or OpenAI are big companies too. There's undisclosed licenses and contracts they have where they're being deployed in various places. There is things that they can report, around how their system is being used, what communities are using it. I agree that are the concerns with surveillance and other things, absolutely. I think it's a deeper ethical question. I might circle back to that though.
Okay, yeah, I think this is really cool. I feel like, because that is also something where then Llama is going to score a lot higher, which would make sense to me.
Well, the score's quite low because.
No, you got rid of I would.
Oh, if you get rid of it.
I personally, I'm not convinced that like downstream impact is like a good thing to be incorporating in some of these things. Like I think it's like we don't, like that's a regulation question where you're allowed to use something like. I'm not sure I would. I need to think about it. Let's.
Like you could almost draw a line at a model access and capability, like a red line, and everything below that, if you were to delete that, you would see Llama 2 just jump significantly in their score, right? I mean, the data and labor is not very good, but they have very clear and transparent on compute methods and model access.
Llama has higher scores than everyone else on everything below.
Yeah, it's definitely the case that these are more transparent open systems, but they're not fully. Let me move on a little bit.
Can I just ask a quick question on
Yeah.
what the content of the actual cells are. Like, for example, capabilities looks like it's discrete 0 to 5, but I mean, there's a lot of capabilities benchmarks. Impact looked like it's 1 to 7, but everyone kind of got a 2 on impact. Like, how was the actual content of the cells? How should I be reading this?
Yeah, I mean, you should be reading as a score that, I mean, I don't recall the exact indicators for some of these cells, but, sorry, when you mean I should be reading it, like, I guess like capabilities I assume is like out of 10, and so there's like 10 or 5 or something, probably 5.
Yeah.
I can zoom into some maybe after offline.
I think it would be useful to read just like a little more texture on what's actually going into the content of these cells.
Yeah.
On the indicators, what you guys are thinking about.
My focus was mainly on these 3, so I can talk most about those. But we made it entirely public, including all the scores and the company's responses, so I can dive in.
Make one quick comment, which is this drawing the line and then excluding risk mitigation and downstream stuff. In terms of advocacy, it's worth noting, for example, that OpenAI is putting out papers on regulating frontier models, and frontier models they define as those that pose risks and so on and so forth. So there is a policy debate going on in the bottom half of this graph that is very explicit. Might be worth being part of that debate rather than just sort of punting on it.
Yes, that is definitely a.
It's going to happen whether you're in it or not. So
Right.
Yeah.
Let me show you all an update. So in this year, May 2024, we rescored it. This time we asked the companies themselves to take a first stab. If this is to scale to more organizations, and some were literally asking us to rate them. They're like, why does OpenAI and Anthropic get all the credit being in the list of 10? We want to be added. So we're like, okay, go score yourself, and then we'll review you rather than the other way around. And so we did this, and we found that Hugging Face and Big Code and AI21 Labs and others, they actually really did change a lot of their practices as a result of knowing that this was, as it did the first time, going to get some press and release reports, including new information that hadn't been released when they read what they were going to be scored on. And again, there's sort of a fallacy here. When you know what the benchmark is, it sort of adjusts. Is it meaningful anymore? There's a lot of questions, but they did release a lot of new information which people cared about that previously was unreleased as part of trying to score highly, get recognition for that. These are sort of the differences. You can see that Big Code and Hugging Face now they increased their score dramatically. So did AI21 Labs, Meta to some extent. OpenAI didn't really engage so much on it. Amazon improved a lot. And a lot of them did release, you can see here in orange, new information as part of the disclosure of releasing the report. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So, when you made these aggregate scores, what's the intention of what's the purpose of making these? So, is the idea to just put pressure on companies to release more information, or is it to advise consumers about which model to use? What do you see as the purpose of making these aggregate scores?
I think both of those things, and a lot of the information, the more transparency there is into it, it's very useful to add an additional competitive dimension, I think, as you alluded to, between these companies. People care a lot about the extent to which models have done certain analyses and are careful not to disseminate disinformation or something like that, or more trustworthy, that they have taken certain there are certain protections for data labor, that they are paying a certain amount. Do you disclose your wages is one of the things for data labor that you hire for your annotation or process.
And just another follow-up question I had is that I was kind of curious about how to interpret the aggregate score in the sense of if it's just a simple average over different dimensions. It does seem to me the dimensions are so different that in a sense I find it difficult to understand what it means average between labor costs and impact or something.
Yeah, it's a tally, and you're absolutely right. The score is not what matters. It's more, we encourage people, especially people that are thinking about regulation or something like that, to actually go in and read the takeaways of specifically the individual indicators, what is and isn't. But I agree, you can't sum over that. It doesn't make sense.
So do you view the overall score as just like a kind of headline result to get people interested in it, or do you see some like kind of information included in the like average score itself?
I mean, I think it's very coarse information. Yeah, I'm not going to defend this as the right way to do it. I agree with you. But it does it is something that draws attention, and most people don't read the papers. So, yeah.
Kind of in this vein, just you guys publish a paper and then the companies all do like different things. Do you have like a decomposition by row of like what rows they change the most along, just to kind of interpret the score change?
I do, but I'd have to pull up the paper. I am gonna say let's do that offline, because I wanted to also talk about the things I was invited to talk about, but phenomenal questions, I appreciate them. For the most part, if my memory serves me correctly, it was a lot around methods and capabilities, and sort of the middle section just disclosing like how, I think it was like measuring what these models are good at, what their use can be used for, basic evaluations, and releasing all that in one place. That really improved, because a lot of the big companies still don't want to release info on data. I can definitely also send that to you. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the data provenance work. So now that we have established that there's a lot of opacity in foundation model development and deployment, and although it's improving, data in particular has we have very little insights into that. And so there have been very few people that have tried to do sort of an ecosystem level analysis of what's going on with the data. And so in the Data Provenance Initiative, we did this at a very large scale. This is not released till later this month, but we looked at thousands of the most popular text data sets for post-training, speech data sets, and text-to-video data sets that are publicly available for training foundation models. And what we found is, to sort of cut this short, is that largely, although it's always been prominent, by far the most prominent source of tokens or hours of content across modalities is the web. And while other platforms like radio or human annotated things, or even like things like TED Talks, movies, Flickr, the books, there are other sources that people have used. Traditionally, human participation was higher. It is frequently now the case that internet videos, especially for speech and video, and especially YouTube, are by far the primary source of content. Some of this is to illustrate the centrality and importance of YouTube later on, and access to that, the ability to crawl that, how much I think ability to train models that are multimodal may hinge on something like that. But all I want to, without diving too deep into this, the web really matters because few things have that scale and heterogeneity that matter for training the most performant foundation models.
And why is tokens?
Tokens for text. This is post-training data sets, but it's the same story, even more web focused for pre-training. And then these are hours.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, large scale. So why does data provenance matter? So we've demonstrated that there's a lot of opacity. We don't know a lot about it, but I'll explain why. With 3 headlines from late 2023. The bottom one, New York Times sued OpenAI and Microsoft over alleged copyright infringement. There are tons of these lawsuits coming out, a lot's riding on them. It's going to take years for them to be decided. There's also this headline, Lion 5B. If you're familiar with that, the most important or impactful or one of the largest text to image data sets online that was used to train hundreds of models, thousands of models. It was shown to contain trace amounts, but on the order of 1,000 child sexual abuse images. And so it got taken down from Hugging Face. And this was a big issue for all the people that had trained very expensive models on this, and were like, oh, damn, what are we going to do? Is there a possibility this model could generate something that could get us in serious trouble? There's also terms of use. So OpenAI, a lot of people are just synthetically generating their training data from APIs, companies' APIs. ByteDance, the creator of TikTok, were doing this, and OpenAI caught them because they're big enough, and they said, no, we're revoking your OpenAI accounts because you're violating our terms of use, which is training models that compete with our own. But there are many reasons on the left that you can see that people may and do care about what is in their training data, and it's very much coming to a head. There's, they want scale, but they also want to be able to pick and choose and sub-select what's important, especially for different domains where this is more sensitive. We did an audit of Hugging Face, which is the most popular repository of public data sets, and found that in 65% of the cases, the licenses were either omitted or incorrect, categorically incorrect, meaning they said non-commercial when it was commercial, or vice versa. And so because of this, we think the AI training data supply chain is pretty much incredibly unstructured, I would say, in a little bit of crisis, both in terms of our understanding the provenance and transparency around that data. This is a paper that we released that we were got some press coverage, and I'm going to illustrate why another sort of evolving crisis in the crawler space that I think is of particular interest. So this paper is called Consent in Crisis, the Rapid Decline of the AI Data Commons. So what did we do? We wanted to actually not just audit the data, but look underneath this popular web data, where it's coming from. And so we looked at 3 of the major pre-training data sets, DOLMA, Refined Web, C4, all derived from Common Crawl, which is a nonprofit that does large crawls of the web like large AI companies are doing. And we sampled 10,000 random websites, as well as the top 2,000 from each of these, meaning the top 2,000 in terms of number of tokens that they contribute to pre-training. And that roughly, the top 2K is about 12%, 24%, 17%. So it's like a good chunk, but it's not all of it. But we have the random sample to sort of balance that out.
And those are top level domains, or are they?
Websites,
Websites, okay.
web domains.
Domains,
Yeah.
Sorry, Shane, when you say 10K here, how big is that out of like C4 DOMA and Refined Web? So I'm guessing you took 10K of C4, 10K of DOMA.
So random 10K of each of those is like less than 1%. It's the head that really is like 12%, 24, 17. The random sample is just to tell us on average what's on the web, and so we can infer across, more widely across what's on the web. So we have all these websites that we know are common in these pre-training data sets. And we went to these websites and over the last decade pulled from the Wayback Machine or the Internet Archive their robots.txt pages and their terms of service pages at all these different timestamps. So the robots.txt is the only page on any website that you have explicit permission to visit if you are not a human. And the terms of service, we went there anyway. I'd argue it's ethical. And so has anyone not heard of a robots.txt? Let me explain. I was there a couple of years ago as well, and so I was like, oh wow, this is like a very important thing. Every web page has the option to put this machine readable document on their page that looks just like this. This is the New York Times. You can go to it right now, newyorktimes.com/robots.txt. They have some documentation, and then they have all user agents are disallowed from going here. They're allowed to go here. They have like all these rules for where people are allowed to go and not, or bots, crawlers are allowed to go and not go. And then they have, you know what, all these AI bots in particular, absolutely not disallowed going anywhere. Yes.
So these are suggestions, right? These are not enforceable.
Well, if you ask the New York Times, it is their affirmative, revocation of consent. Like this is saying you absolutely cannot. There's no legal precedent, according to our advising lawyers, of this being enforced in any way. So AI companies.
There's an open court case that's probably going to have that as part of it.
Which one?
No, the Microsoft.
That one.
The New York Times suing Microsoft case for grabbing and violating copyright is going to cite the fact that they have revoked consent proactively in the robot.txt.
Even scraping itself was like LinkedIn was suing people who were scraping LinkedIn. I don't remember where that was resolved.
So very relevant, but social media companies are the best defending against crawlers. They also, there's a lot of lawsuits that, like Elon is famous for suing a lot of researchers. And generally, it's, from what I understand of those cases, it's said that, well, it's actually okay to try to crawl and circumvent the robots.txt. It's not legally enforceable, at least so far. That seems to be the way things are panning out, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle here, and it's an important piece. There's a lot to say there. As a non-lawyer, I'm gonna leave that to a little bit later.
I guess I meant programmatically, like there is no enforceability. You can create a bot that can just ignore the robots.txt.
So we're gonna get into this. There is technical enforceability. Cloudflare, which backs like 25-30% of the web, has released a new anti-bot, anti-AI, special software. There's several startups that have emerged that have huge Series A now, that have large contracts with different publishers, that Perplexity is backing, others that are trying to basically charge a small fee every time someone visits a web page that's a bot, that if it's a bot. But I'm going to talk a little bit more later. It really matters what the use is. So like, this wasn't as chaotic. These startups weren't really emerging as important before we had AI uses that seemed to compete with the original source of the website. But we have evidence talking about that as well. Let me come back to it. We collected information on the robots.txt, so what types of restrictions they were offering on specifically crawlers associated with AI uses. And then we looked at terms of service, and we annotated those for various common clauses. Is it open access, non-commercial, non-compete? Nowadays, there's a spike, as you'll see, in no AI. Don't use any of our website for AI is like a new clause that's like very common now. And then we asked, what's the purpose of the website? Because for fair use and copyright, one element of the four-factor test is is the use of the data competing with the original use of the data? Are you taking news data and then distributing news, or are you using it for something else? And then we looked at how monetized with paywalls and ads the websites are, how much user content there is, and sensitive content. This is a quick summary of the different agents that we found and the level of observations. Basically, there's a lot of people using crawlers. The gray ones are AI associated. But for the most part, there are dozens of industries that rely on this across the board, not just marketing and price comparison and job aggregation websites, but and market research and finance, but a lot of academics and web archives, and there's dozens of tools that use this. For cybersecurity, it's also a thing, and for accessibility, I could go on. These are the main crawlers that we looked at. This is already out of date because OpenAI now has introduced a third one. Interestingly here, this is going to come up. Anthropic has a documented crawler. It's called Claudebot. And you can go read about it. Oh, it used to be here. I wonder if they took it down. I think they might have taken this down. I have to double check, but they have a page that talks about Claudebot and introduces it, and it's their official crawler. And but then we found dozens or hundreds, thousands of websites that also had Anthropic-AI there. You just saw the New York Times had it as well, and this became like a news story. We found that like thousands of websites were using this because they thought they were stopping Anthropic-AI. We don't know where it came from. When really they were missing out Claudebot in many cases. So they're actually, Anthropic was crawling them a ton, and they thought they were stopping it because all these other websites were using this crawler name, but in fact they weren't.
So you're getting the agents by crawling the robots.txt?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're anything listed there,
Yes.
anything not listed there, not captured by your
Yes.
crawl. Okay.
Well, sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you're listing the agents in the previous slide.
Yeah.
The one even before this.
Mm-hmm.
And you are identifying the agents in the first column because they appear in robot.txt files.
Yeah, we don't have the other side.
Right.
And that's a big thing, like people are trying to register crawlers now and like be able to identify them. There are ways around that. You can use vendor proxies to essentially obfuscate who you are.
So number observed here is the number of times you see that string in a robots.txt.
Yeah. So, skip through, the results that are interesting are that if you look over time, we captured in the head of the distribution, the top 2,000 domains, or about 15-20% of the most important data, the most high quality and the most diverse and like frequently refreshed. If you look at the way that restrictions on crawlers have changed, there's sort of a massive bump in the last basically 1 year where there's either full restrictions or like very severe restrictions on, in particular, crawlers that span not just like commercial AI, but non-commercial AI and academic AI as well. Basically, a huge no from a lot of the major websites. And if we look by organization that's blocked, it's almost overwhelmingly OpenAI at 26%. This is on the log scale again, it spikes over here. Google search, people almost always carve that out because they want to be found by Google search. That stays pretty constantly available. But then you'll see, okay, OpenAI is very high, Anthropic's about half that, Common Crawl is pretty high. And as you go down the list, Meta and Cohere, they kind of fly under the radar because people are less aware of their AI and their crawling habits. So there's huge asymmetries here that aren't based really off of like differences in how these things are used. They're just what has the person heard of, and do they have like a web admin that knows how to go and document this, or they've invested in a startup that will like help you block it. It's very difficult also with hundreds of AI startups and companies to for anyone to go and track all these. There's a huge burden on the website's side to try to figure this out, and very few can hire the support to make sure they get it right and are up to date. OpenAI, for the last year, they keep introducing new crawlers, and you have to immediately go to their website, find out what it is, go and then block that. There's not an easy way to do this. If we look at terms of service, so the tragedy is that robots.txt, while it's machine readable, it's not legally enforceable. Terms of service might actually be, or at least there's more of a precedent that it could be legally enforceable, but it's not machine readable, and machines don't rely on it. But if you look at terms of service, it's actually much more aggressive with the number of tokens that have some sort of restriction. Again, for the first time, we're seeing no AI and no crawling and AI as an explicit clause. We're seeing no crawling, no AI, non-commercial use, non-compete. All these things could have implications depending on how the data is being used. And so altogether, we see sort of a really big uptick in trend. And the thing that I'm realizing as I speak to more people is that because the robots.txt is a suggestion, it can be ignored. And in some cases, it is ignored. The companies even say, and I've seen stats on this, that the way that they design their crawlers, it's actually quite hard to get them not to visit sometimes the things they're not supposed to. It's not an easy fix for them because they're very stochastic in the way that they work by intention. And so often they circumvent it. But when websites lose faith in these suggestions, they realize that they can turn off the faucet by applying restrictions, investing in technologies that try to block crawlers that aren't registered, don't explicitly license, don't go through certain portals. And this is a little bit challenging also for the open web. If you think about academia and transparency, accountability, a lot of journalists, use these things. Web archives are the source of tens of thousands of academic articles from sociology to computer science to anthropology, whatever it is. But all of it goes through the same funnel, which is crawlers, and we don't have good mechanisms to disentangle the different uses, competing commercial AI from all these other things that maybe weren't as much of a threat. This slide is just to sort of show that if you look at the robots.txt restrictions and you look at the terms of service restrictions, you know, here's restricted, partially restricted, no restrictions, these are different variants. It's not like these are well correlated. That's to show they frequently disagree and that people aren't expressing the same thing, nor can they express the same thing in their terms of service as in their robots.txt. Our takeaway from this is that this mechanism is failing. It's not working either for the creator or for the AI developer or any other crawlers. It's sort of an inefficient allocation, and it puts a burden on both of them to try to figure something out that was built in or designed in the 90s and deployed in the early 2000s and like doesn't seem to make a lot of sense right now. And I want to quickly stress, we're talking about like information access on the web by crawlers and bots. That's 60% of all information movement and access by websites. You know, most of the web is navigated by machines, not humans. And I think that's sort of an important thing to keep in mind, that this will have cascading implications if we get it wrong. I have a couple more slides that I think are important from this study. This one here is looking at different features of the web, of the websites, and this is the statistical difference between what you see from the top 2,000 websites and the random distribution of websites. So if we look at this box here, we see that the top 2,000 websites are 35% more likely than random websites to have restrictive terms of service. So what's the difference between the most popular websites and, the largest ones and usually highest quality ones versus most of the web? Well, for the most part, the most popular, I don't have a good term for this, the most impactful for pre-training are news, periodical, or regular type websites that regularly post articles and new information. They're frequently more likely to be social media or forums or encyclopedia databases or academic. Whereas the rest of the web, the random web, I didn't know this, is actually predominantly like organizational or personal websites, blogs. That's a ton of the web. And these things don't matter as much, but they're mainly the random sample. So the important thing to note is that the most restricted websites, which are the most popular or the most high quality and largest sources, they're also the ones that are the most monetized with paywalls and ads, and they're the ones with the richest video, audio, multimodal content. So when we think about scaling laws for AI foundation models, they require lots of heterogeneity and scale to perform best. If these restrictions are respected by a company or organization, they're going to lose out on a lot of the highest quality data, a lot of the most factual data, a lot of the freshest data from news and periodicals, and a lot of the multimodal content. So when we talk about text to speech, text to video, video to image, whatever it is type models, I think that that race is going to be much more concentrated as a result of these changes. And it's likely that just those large companies that can license them or already own them may have a starker advantage. I'll stop on this slide for questions for the last analysis.
Seems like there's an interesting market opportunity for a company to act like Black Duck did for open source software upon a transaction. I'm acquiring company X. I want to do an analysis of what their systems have been using and drawing upon, and if they're illegal or going against terms of service. That would be interesting information to know.
The problem is we don't know what illegal is under the current copyright regime, right? But I agree with you. And there's a lack of opacity to sort of do that due diligence in the first place. Yeah.
I understand there's no legal recourse behind this yet, but is there kind of a discussion around if I change my robots.txt file, but you crawled prior to I changed it, are you then obligated to like unlearn whatever you learned prior to me updating my robots.txt
This is a
file?
huge sticking point. Great question. It's actively legally debated, to my understanding. So also if you said, oh yeah, crawl us, we're open to everyone crawling, but then now you realize that you stopped it, even if you explicitly gave consent before, maybe you didn't envision or know what the impact of generative AI would be on you or what that might entail before these technologies were even there. So people are making that argument, like that wasn't, affirmative consent. you know, we didn't know, we didn't have any idea, you know, about these uses. They just weren't there before to the same extent. And so, yeah, that's actively discussed. In terms of unlearning, really sticky because these models are very expensive to train. People, especially policy people, are hanging their hat a lot on machine unlearning as this new method. It's very unproven, it's very difficult, it has side effects. I don't see it being used at scale, in at least currently in any sort of real deployed setting, and companies certainly don't want to. It's a good solution for this other than safeguards and hard-coded, like, oh, you asked about this copyrighted thing, if they ask about Star Wars, don't create a Star Wars image, you know, like, there's not, you know, they're basically just trying to probabilistically reduce the chance of these things. I'm gonna go to my last most controversial slide, and unfortunately I don't think we have time after that to go to the last set of sort of safe harbor stuff, but you can invite me back or we can chat another time. This slide got a lot of interest, but I'm gonna disclaim it before I talk about it. So here we wanted to measure how general purpose AI systems are actually being used versus the data they're training on. We do not know how AI systems are being used. You can tell me, but unless you have privileged information to internal ChatGPT logs, you don't know. The best we have are volunteered logs by people that are drive-by data sets that they have volunteered, which could be completely different from the real distribution of how people around the world are using it, because and also privacy constraints. So this is a huge open question. We don't know how people are really using it. I spoke to some OpenAI folks that do know, and they said this wasn't far off, except the sexual role play was vastly over-exaggerated in this. But this is from Wild Chat, and this is volunteered logs, the main data set that is available. And we manually went through, and I read hundreds of these. And basically the number one use appears to be creative composition, people writing like creative stories and poetry and like, I don't know, manga, whatever it is. And number two is people trying to do some sort of romantic, you know, or sexual role play, followed by brainstorming and planning, explanation, and general info. And you'll notice that news is kind of way at the bottom here, like current affairs information. This is a challenging, I don't know what to make of this, because is that good for journalism and news? If people aren't using AI, or at least ChatGPT at this time for it, that doesn't mean that they're not using Perplexity or other AIs to give them their news. So maybe it's not affecting those industries that we care about. But at the same time, something like this might weaken the case for, you know, New York Times or other news agencies, because AI will just say, oh, people aren't using us for news. You know, people go to social media for news. We're not taking any of your market. You know, this isn't copyright infringement to the extent that that's a factor. Any questions on this? Yeah.
Did you have any sense of a measure of people using ChatGPT to generate news articles and then posting them on other sites? Because, yeah, I don't know. That's not what you mean by news here.
Here is people are asking about current affairs or information that could conceivably be news. It's just about the query. I didn't see any of that, but I have a colleague at University of Washington, and she did find journalists real news articles where they had edited and asked for it to generate part of their news articles, and their logs are publicly available in this data set, and then their articles are online. So
is that creative composition?
What's that?
Is that counted under like creative composition in this case?
Under what?
Creative composition.
I think that depends on how it was phrased. So it might be brainstorming and planning, you know, it could be creative composition.
I was gonna ask something about like search engine optimization, but for like AI trawlers. Do you see anything like Nike says tries to direct traffic in some way, like, oh, definitely check out our new Pegasus line? Just kind of incentives for like showing up on robots.txt or like showing up in these queries in the first place?
I think your intuition's right. I think it's going to be very big soon. I think the main way we see it are these like big contracts that like publishers and you know, even Lionsgate are doing with Runway and other, like people are trying to not be left out, therefore be the first one that's like generated. U.com, just compared to Google, like I think they have some contracts, and on election day last night, they were like directing to certain websites more than others. Like I think the publishers are the first to try to like not be left out, and are thinking about that. They want to also secure contracts, as well as just letting it be open to crawling. So yeah, I think they'll be bigger.
And I also kind of want to ask in this like market evolution part thing, like one way of also solving this principal agent problem is just like vertically integrating the market, right? So like having New York Times have an in-house, you know, Llama instance or something that they say, oh, now this is our AI that you can use. We get all the benefits from it. You guys, once you have a New York Times subscription, you can just ask us, what's the news of the day? What do I need to know about the election? And it'll go through all the articles we've written and kind of summarize them for you.
But I feel like if you were to ask Perplexity or whatever about, you know, you want to go to one website,
Yeah.
you know, and then be like, tell me information without even specifying New York Times, like aggregate all of them, summarize them. You know, I don't know if people are already going to NewYorkTimes.com. I don't know the extra
guess-
marginal benefit.
I mean, the point is like the market then evolves if that's the new like unit of knowledge or something, right? Like now I can have a subscription across like New York Times, Economist, and WSJ. And then, you know, if I have all three of them, then my trawler can go across all three of them, something like that. The way I see this lawsuit is that New York Times, et cetera, want the rents from the work that they're doing, from the knowledge creation they're doing. So I guess what I was asking was, do you see any evidence of like strategy or like long-term planning in kind of the composition of the robots TXT to meet these types of incentives to like capture market share yet, or is that not quite there?
I mean, I think the strategy is get exclusive contracts from both sides, make sure there's a funnel of payment, and then I think they want to like assert Google search and be one place people go, ChatGPT or Perplexity, whatever it is, ask for information, and then there'll be a trickle down to the news and the publishers and everything else from advertisements that are going to be shown on the web page. I don't know whether it's Gemini, Google search, whether it's ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever it is. I think that's the way things are headed. The scary thing about that is I'm worried that the web becomes sort of territories of like, this is the ChatGPT territory, this is the Anthropic territory with these exclusive contracts, and then to protect their data from other bots accessing them, they're like, we're not letting any non-humans access this information to preserve its value. And that's a potentially bad future for all of the other non-AI uses of crawling and open web and transparency and, you know, information access. I think I'm going to leave it there, and happy to talk about any of these pieces some more. But hey, thank you so much for phenomenal questions. This is a great audience.